their political activity. This is a really big deal as far as the 1920s are concerned. And the critical factor here is, of course, for the first time in American history, from 1920 on, American women could vote. Their right to vote is being recognized on a national basis because of the 19th Amendment. Now, one thing that's interesting about this to me is that women have voted entirely within what we call the academic era. So that means that there were universities and there were political scientists who were studying things like this. Men had voted for a long time, so no one necessarily really studied male voting behavior a long time ago. But women had voted entirely within the academic era. So, of course, that means that their vote has been studied from the very beginning. And of course, you know, when this issue came up, there were those who would hypothesize about what's going to happen in the future. So some people would say, okay, well, that means we're never going to go to war again because, you know, what woman would send her son, her husband, her brother to war? No one's going to want to do that, of course. A notion that the government would become generally more humane because women were part of it. You know, no one knew exactly what was going to happen, but these are the kind of things that they were speculating on. So then women start voting, of course, and of course the academics, the political scientists began to study it. And here's what I want to tell you. For the first few decades, so that would be like the 20s, 30s, 40s, and even into the 50s, women voted exactly like men. They're in lockstep with each other. So, you know, if someone's trying to find some kind of unique female voting pattern, they're not going to find it at that time. The women voted exactly like men. And of course, the political scientists began to say women are exactly like men. They're voting they vote the same way. Now, I can't tell you exactly what's going on. I mean, I'm sure my speculation is the same kind of as others would say. But we think that the reason they voted exactly like men was kind of a deferential act. You know, they hadn't been voters. They had not been politically active. And so they tended to defer to men. You know, the men seemed to think, you know, they knew better about that. So we may just be seeing a pattern of, you know, where they are mirroring the black vote, the male vote. They're mirroring the male vote, because the way the men vote, the way your husband would vote, that's the way you're going to vote too. You know, whatever he says, you probably think that's the right thing. Now that's just in the beginning, of course. You know, so the first 4 decades we see this kind of lockstep of behavior, but then the 60s come along, and right about that time we see a divergence. And I'm sure you guys know that women do vote distinctly different than men. And it's critical. I mean, women are 51% of the electorate. And if all women decided to vote one way, they're going to win every damn time, basically. And you ignore the women's vote at your peril. You better be paying attention to that. Anyway, we found it took a while. I think women had to gain their own footing here. They had to figure out their own way, basically. It's not really for some decades before it will manifest. But women did indeed begin voting in the 20s, but, you know, began to express themselves uniquely kind of in the 60s and from that point on, essentially. Now, women were politically active. That's what I want you to know. So number one, they voted. Of course, that becomes really important. Number two, they became increasingly politically organized. So in the 1920s, they created something called the National Women's Party. And the idea was, you know, that maybe women should have their own unique party. Now, that didn't last very long, I think primarily because the Democratic and Republican Party did not like that. They don't want women going separate. So they wanted to subsume women into their parties, of course. They want to guarantee that you would be voting Democratic. So fairly quickly, the National Women's Party begins to go by the by. But they formed other women's political organizations. One of the most famous is the League of Women Voters. And the League of Women Voters continues to this day, founded in the 1920s, continues to even this day. It is primarily an organization of women designed to promote what I'll call small d democracy. So small d means democratic activities on the part of Americans, to get them more involved in the political process. And one thing that the League of Women's Voters does routinely is that they support debates in various campaigns, including, of course, presidential elections and things like that. So, you know, part of what they were doing was organizing themselves politically. Another thing they were doing, and I have to tell you that I didn't know this was happening even when I was an adult, but they were promoting something called the ERA, and the ERA is an Equal Rights Amendment. And I have to tell you that I thought that was from the 1960s. I thought the women's movement in the 1960s began to promote the concept of the ERA. It started in the 1920s, and these were women who believed that there should be a constitutional amendment which recognizes the equality of women. And I have to tell you, I do not think, I shouldn't say that. It's a good idea. It's a critical idea in many ways. And I do want you guys to know that there is an amendment. It is part of it's out there in play. The problem is that we can't get the states to ratify it. So, you know, you just need I don't know how many more states would be needed to ratify, but this actually could happen. So this isn't something, this isn't something new. And by the way, it's not equal for women, so it does make a tremendous amount of sense, of course, that the women should have an equal rights amendment. But as early as the 1920s, women are being politically. The flapper was voting. The flapper was politically organized. The flapper was promoting equal rights for women. These are all kind of critical factors. The second area of activity was that women became increasingly involved in the economy. And I'm pretty sure that's where I am on the next tape, so I'm going to stop right now. And how cool is this? I don't have to walk there. I got myself a remote. Bam.